because Jeffrey Epstein was trying to meet with me.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah, and I was like, what?
I'm like, no thanks.
Yeah, thing to dip my toe into and get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible.
A man finished his film. 6 days later, he was dead. The film was cut, 24 minutes removed, and the version you watched in theaters was never the one he made. Now the Epstein files are open, and everything that was cut from that film is being confirmed in real time. So here is the only question that matters right now. Did Stanley Kubrick try to hand us a map? And did someone make sure we never read it? 2 films, 2 directors, 2 completely different eras. One made in 1999, one made in 2023. And until recently, nobody connected them. Film critics put them in separate categories. Audiences watched them in separate decades. Journalists treated them as separate conversations. But line them up side by side. Look at what each film depicts. Look at who made them. Look at what happened to both men after they made them. The overlap is not vague. It is not approximate. It is precise. Stanley Kubrick was not a casual filmmaker. He was obsessive, surgical, the kind of director who would spend years on a single project, researching so deeply that he came out knowing more than the actual experts. Military tactics, space travel, the Holocaust. Whatever the subject, Kubrick went all the way down. So when he decided in the late 1990s to make a film about secret societies, masked rituals, and the sexual exploitation of women by powerful, wealthy men, he wasn't imagining it. He knew. And then there is Mel Gibson, a young man who arrived in Hollywood and almost immediately felt something was wrong. He couldn't name it at first. He just knew the environment he was walking into wasn't what it looked like from the outside. The parties were strange. The power dynamics were off. Things people said and did around him didn't match anything he had experienced in the real world. He spent years trying to convince himself he was paranoid. Then he found out he wasn't. And the first major thing he did with his Hollywood comeback was produce a film about child trafficking. These 2 men, these 2 films, 24 years apart, saying the same thing. Eyes Wide Shut came out in 1999. On the surface, it looks like a psychological drama. Tom Cruise plays a doctor whose wife confesses a fantasy. He spirals. He ends up at a secret party in a mansion outside the city. That is the surface reading. The real film is something else entirely, because what Kubrick embedded inside that story is a precise, almost clinical portrait of how elite abuse networks actually function. The secret gatherings hidden inside legitimate social events, the handlers who recruit women from vulnerable backgrounds, the billionaire gatekeepers who control access, the ritual that binds everyone together so that silence becomes survival. Every single one of those elements is now documented in the Epstein files. But here's the part nobody talks about. The version of Eyes Wide Shut that exists today is not the version Kubrick made. According to people who have studied the original production materials, approximately 24 minutes of footage were removed after Kubrick delivered his final cut. A third-person narration that was part of the original structure was stripped out completely. The pacing, the inserts, and the architecture of the film all changed. Kubrick was one of the most detail-obsessed directors in the history of cinema. Every frame was intentional. Every edit was deliberate. He would not have made those choices. Someone else did. And then 6 days after delivering his final cut to Warner Brothers, Stanley Kubrick was dead. Nobody is making a definitive claim about what happened, but here is what we know. The most meticulous filmmaker Hollywood ever produced spent years making a film that depicted elite, ritualistic abuse with documentary-level precision. He handed it over, and within a week, he was gone, and the film was immediately altered. The timeline speaks for itself. But here is where the story gets a second layer. While Kubrick was embedding warnings inside fiction, Mel Gibson was living the reality that Kubrick was depicting. And the internet has almost completely missed this connection. Mel Gibson arrived in Hollywood as a young man, and something felt wrong immediately. The parties, the power dynamics, the things people seemed comfortable saying and doing in front of him, none of it matched the real world he came from. He described it like walking into a strange town, a bar where everyone goes quiet when the stranger walks in, a house on the hill they tell you not to visit, a feeling so unsettling that you try to convince yourself you imagined it. And then, years later, you find out you were exactly right. The industry knew he felt it, and they did what they always do to people who get too close. They destroyed him. The DUI, the leaked phone calls, the blacklisting, projects quietly falling apart. Studios are refusing to touch him. A career that had been one of the biggest in Hollywood was systematically dismantled. Not because of what he said publicly, because of what he knew privately. And then he came back. And the first major project of that comeback was Sound of Freedom, a film about child trafficking networks, fake talent scouts. Beautiful women posing as modeling agents approach families with vulnerable children and offer them something that looks like an opportunity. Different bait, same trap. Because here's what both films are actually describing. Predators use legitimacy as a weapon. The appearance of status, opportunity, and exclusivity used to lower defenses before the real agenda reveals itself. And now Joe Rogan is sitting at the center of both stories, not as a commentator, as a character. Because Rogan attended a party in the Hollywood Hills years ago, hosted by Naomi Campbell, a name that appears consistently in the Epstein files. He stood in a room with Demi Moore and Lenny Kravitz. He watched the energy. He felt what Mel Gibson had described. Something was off. These people existed in a different world. He called it an eyes wide shut party. His words, not a journalist's framing, not a conspiracy label. Joe Rogan looked at that room, and the first thing his brain reached for was Kubrick's film. Because somewhere in his gut, he already understood what that film was really about. Comment below. Do you think both films were deliberate warnings? Or is this the biggest coincidence in Hollywood history? Here is the part that makes Rogan go silent. He was not just a passive observer in this story. In 2017, Jeffrey Epstein's team made an attempt to arrange a direct meeting with Joe Rogan. They reached out. They tried to bring him into the circle. Rogan said no, immediately, without hesitation, because something about it felt completely wrong. He is now in the Epstein files, not as a participant, as a refusal, a name on a list of people they tried to recruit and couldn't get. Think about what that means. Here is a man who attended an eyes wide shut party hosted by one of Epstein's alleged associates, who was personally approached by Epstein's organization, who said no. He then spent years on his podcast talking about Hollywood's dark side and Kubrick's suppressed film, while being attacked relentlessly by the same mainstream media that had protected these networks for decades. The hit pieces, the Spotify controversies, the deplatforming campaigns, the relentless effort to paint him as dangerous and irresponsible. Mel Gibson got blacklisted. Kubrick got his film altered and died 6 days later. Corey Feldman spent 30 years being called a liar. And Rogan got put through the media grinder. Different methods, same message. Stop talking. And that's where things get complicated. Because when you lay both films directly on top of each other, the overlap is not thematic. It is structural. In Eyes Wide Shut, the entry point into the network is a high-end social gathering. Wealthy, legitimate, filled with respected names. You get pulled in through access granted by someone you already trusted, who was already inside. In Sound of Freedom, the entry point is a fake talent scout. Someone who looks like an opportunity. Someone who uses the language of success and advancement to move people toward danger. Different bait, same trap. In Eyes Wide Shut, once you are inside, the system protects itself through shared guilt. Everyone who participates is now part of it. You cannot go to the police because going to the police means confessing your own involvement. The network is not held together by loyalty. It is held together by mutual incrimination. That is textbook Epstein. He kept records, flight logs, photographs, recordings, not out of sentimentality, out of strategy. Every powerful name that passed through his orbit became a liability he could activate if necessary. That was not a trafficking operation with a blackmail component. That was a blackmail empire with a trafficking component. Now the Epstein files are confirming what both films depicted. Unredacted documents named Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, chairman and CEO of DP World, one of the largest port operators on the planet. His emails with Epstein revealed a relationship involving the movement of women across international borders, connections to spas in Turkey, the use of global logistics infrastructure to enable exploitation. He resigned in February after the exposure. That is not a subplot from Eyes Wide Shut. That is the actual plot of Eyes Wide Shut. In February 2026, the FBI officially labeled Les Wexner, founder of Victoria's Secret, as a co-conspirator in the Epstein case. Wexner had granted Epstein power of attorney over $1 billion fortune. His retail businesses were embedded in the operational framework of Epstein's network. Models, recruitment, access. Kubrick showed us a costume shop where young women were commodified. Gibson showed us talent scouts who turned children into inventory. Wexner ran the real version of both. And then there is Corey Feldman, a child star who experienced firsthand what was happening inside Hollywood's walls. He has spent his entire adult life trying to get people to listen, who gave names to the police in 1993, who went on live television and tried to say it out loud, who wrote a book. He screamed into every microphone he could find. And every single time, the industry made sure nobody listened. Barbara Walters, one of the most respected journalists of her generation, told Feldman that by speaking out, he was damaging an entire industry. Not that she would investigate, not that she would look into it, that he was causing harm by telling the truth. That is the same energy that altered Kubrick's film, the same energy that dismantled Mel Gibson's career, the same energy that targeted Joe Rogan and then spent years attacking his credibility when he wouldn't cooperate. The pattern is always identical. Silence the messenger, protect the network, move on. So here is the question nobody in mainstream media wants to answer. If two directors from completely different eras made films depicting the same network with the same precision, and both paid the same price for it, what does that say about who was watching? What does that say about who had enough power to alter a dead man's film, blacklist a Hollywood icon, and spend years trying to silence a podcaster with 100 million listeners? And if the Epstein files keep opening, how many more maps are we going to find that we were never supposed to read? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Kubrick was silenced? Is Gibson's comeback connected to the files dropping? And who else knew and stayed quiet? Subscribe, because this story is just getting started.